So to all my international subscribers, tomorrow is a major holiday in the United States, Memorial Day. Today we remember and honor all the men and women who have died fighting for our country. I had the pleasure of serving in the Navy from 1985 to 1989. And when people say thank you for your service to me outside, I'm totally honest when I say it was all my pleasure. It was my pleasure. Because I was fortunate enough to serve during peacetime. I can honestly say the Navy gave me more than I gave the Navy. They took a wild, crazy inner city kid and taught him how to be a gentleman and a warrior. But when you look at these kids that have volunteered since 9/11, 2001, these kids have sacrificed tremendous, tremendous sacrifice. And I mean, young men like Petty Officer Mansour volunteered for the Navy SEALs, and while he was helping defend Iraq with Iraqi soldiers, the enemy threw a hand grenade and Petty Officer Mansour dove on it, taking the shock, saving the Iraqi soldiers and some Navy SEALs that were there. Sacrificed his life. There's no greater love than this, that a man give up his life for a friend. These are the kind of sacrifices our men and women are making, keeping us safe from these terrorists that would want to destroy and kill us. And, you know, after 9/11, it wasn't just, these, inner city kids like me trying to get it together, join the military. There were Wall Street millionaires joining the fight. There were farm boys from Oklahoma joining the fight. There were men like Senator Tom Cotton, Harvard Law graduate, had the world at his fingers, volunteered to fight in the Army. When the Army offered him a JAG officer job, being a lawyer in the Army, he said, no, I want to go where the fight is. And he went and became an infantry officer and went into the combat. Men like Pat Tillman, NFL football player making millions of dollars, gave up $1 million in contracts to volunteer. Not only volunteer for the Army, but for one of the toughest spots in the Army Rangers. Fought several battles before he lost his life and laid down his life for us over there in Afghanistan. And it all started on 9/11, when people who hated our freedom thought that they could destroy us and make us live in fear for the rest of our life. But I remember that day at Ground Zero, watching it on TV, when the New York City Fire Department put the American flag on their tallest ladder and raised it, and everybody in the city shouted and clapped. And then when our president got up with his bullhorn and wanted to make sure people in the back could hear him, he's like, "Can you hear me?" And a construction worker in the back said, "Yeah, we could hear you." And the president said, "Yeah, I could hear you too. And these people who did this to us, they're going to hear all of us really quick." And the crowd erupted in cheers. And that day, there were no Republican Americans, there were no Democrat Americans, there were no African Americans, there were no Italian Americans. We were all Americans standing united to defend our families and our freedom against evil people that wanted us dead. And all the experts said, America will never be the same. And you know what? We remain the same. They didn't take away our freedom because they didn't understand the spirit of America. They didn't understand that we still believe what our forefathers said. Give me freedom or give me death. They don't know. We remember what Ben Franklin said. If a man's willing to give up his security to have freedom, he deserves neither. Americans were bold that day. And like I said, I talked to recruiters and they said men were coming that never thought about joining the military. They said they exceeded their recruitment goals because we went and took the fight to the enemy. And many men and women died fighting for our freedom. And that's what we take this day to remember. I just want to tell you one short story before I close. During the War of 1812, there was a British ship outside of Fort McHenry, and it had a bunch of American prisoners. And America sent a young a young lawyer named Francis Scott Keys to negotiate a prisoner exchange. So he talked to the captain, and they talked about the prisoner exchange, which prisoners they would exchange. And then Francis said, can I go see the prisoners? So Francis went below decks, seen the prisoners all dirty, hungry, miserable, chained together. And he told them, he said, you know, I'm doing a prisoner exchange. Hopefully we'll have you out of here in a few hours. So they were all happy. And Francis Scott Keys went back up on deck to negotiate with the captain. And the captain said, sir, this is all academic. By tomorrow, you'll all be my captive. So Francis Scott Keys said, what are you talking about, Captain? He said, look around. See all those ships? So Francis looked down the ocean and seen hundreds and hundreds of British naval ships. And he said, you see Fort McHenry? On my command, we're going to bomb. We're all going to bomb that fort. And Francis Scott Key says, what are you talking about? There's men and women in that fort. You can't bomb that fort. He goes, well, don't worry. He said, I sent a messenger over there. And I told them, you see that flag, that big American flag over the rampart? If they lower it, we'll stop bombing. So Francis Scott Key went down and told the prisoners what was going on. And the prisoners said, oh, dear God, please don't let them lower that flag. And all night long, the English ships were bombing. They were bombing that fort, and that flag still stood. They're bombing that fort, and then finally the captain said, you know what? Bomb that flag. We're going to make that flag come down. And they just kept bombing that flag. Meanwhile, the prisoners are shouting up to Francis, does the flag still stand? Is the flag still standing? And Francis was like, yeah, the flag's still standing, guys. The flag's still standing. They're like, oh, thank God. Then it went on through the night, through the dawn's early night. And they said, Francis, is the flag still standing? And he's like, it's so dark, I can't tell. I can't tell. And then when the sun started coming up, they said, Francis, is the flag still standing? And then Francis could tell by the dawn's early light that the flag was still standing. And he said, yes, the flag is still standing. And they celebrated. And then Francis Scott Key said he could hear the captain say to one of the sailors, how the heck is that flag still standing? So the sailor looked through his telescope and said, Captain, it's being held up by dead Americans. He goes, what are you talking about, dead Americans? He said, apparently every American who got killed holding that flag fell down and another American climbed up on him. There's bodies 20 feet high of dead Americans holding that American flag up. And Francis Scott Key said at that time he remembered, a thought came through his mind, he remembered hearing George Washington say that the Christian American would rather die on his back than live on his knees. So and then Francis Scott Key went on and wrote the Star-Spangled Banner based on his experience that night. So the next time you're standing for the Star-Spangled Banner or national anthem, remember the dead Americans that held that flag up. Because that's what the symbol of that flag is. Remember Pat Tillman, who gave up his life, his great life as an NFL football player. Remember Petty Officer Mansour, who dove on a bomb, not only to save Americans, but to save Iraqis. That's the American way. And I ask, this day, put aside politics. Doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, libertarian, socialist. Today, we are all Americans honoring the men and women that died so we could argue tomorrow about our politics. And we have the freedom of speech to say what we want to say. God bless America, and God bless our fallen heroes. Thank you.